Hello, homeless liaisons. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to listen to this webinar. My name is Vanessa Waters, and I am the McKinney-Vento Immigrant Grant Manager at the Tennessee Department of Education. We ground our work in our strategic plan, Best for All. The plan focuses on three priorities: academics, whole child, and educators for all Tennessee students. As you all know, the work you're doing with students in transition is strongly connected to all three of these areas. The support you provide to educators, students, and families is crucial. During this webinar, I'll provide a quick overview for identifying homeless students. I will talk about homeless data and classifications and homeless students applies for the school year. I will talk about McKinney-Vento Students Serves, as well as McKinney-Vento Student Services, as well as unaccompanied homeless youth. Then I will move on to look at the homeless student research query and discrepancies. And lastly, I'll wrap up with resources and contact information. So let's look at identifying homeless students. The purpose of the McKinney-Vento Education for Homeless Children and Youth EHCY program is to ensure that each homeless child or youth has equal access to the same free, appropriate public education, including a public preschool education as provided to other children and youth. So let me first define what homelessness is. The definition of homeless under the McKinney-Vento Act are children or youth who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, including children and youth who are sharing the housing of other persons due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or similar reason, living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, or camping grounds due to lack of alternate adequate accommodations, living in emergency or transitional shelters or abandoned in hospitals, living in a public or private place not designed for or ordinarily used as a regular sleeping accommodation for human beings, living in cars, parks, public spaces, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, bus or train stations or similar settings, and who are migratory children living in the above circumstances. To ensure that students in homeless situations are identified, LEAs and school personnel should provide targeted outreach through information sharing and gathering activities, such as including a housing and nighttime residency questionnaire in the LEA's enrollment packet to screen for possible McKinney-Vento eligibility. It is extremely important that you work with your LEA personnel to ensure that the LEA policies and procedures comply with the McKinney-Vento Act. Your front office staff, your enrollment staff should also know and adhere to the McKinney-Vento enrollment policies and know who to contact when the homeless student has been identified. You need to make sure that the proper staff and the LEA know about the attendance policy, the transportation procedures, immunization policies, and the policies of students being able to participate in extracurricular activities, tutoring, and any other services that they would like to participate in. Identification is a crucial first step to ensuring the provision of needed supports, and schools must remove barriers to improve the identification of students experiencing homelessness. The more people in the LEA that know about the identification of homeless students, the more you will be able to provide those students with the much needed services and supports that they need to be academically and educationally successful. So when you're identifying eligible students, it's important to remember that the circumstances vary from family to family, and that students experiencing homelessness do not all look the same, and their behavior patterns are going to be different among each different child. So again, you want to make sure that you're looking at all of those factors. So again, as a best practice, LEA should be using a housing questionnaire to help with the identification of students experiencing homelessness. You can find a sample housing questionnaire nighttime residency form, an e-plan, and the McKinney-Vento toolkit, which you can find on the slide here. And that questionnaire will ask simple questions to help you identify a student that possibly may be eligible for McKinney-Vento services. When you do go into ePlan TDOE resources, there is no login information required, so you can just go in there and access that toolkit and look at the sample that we have on the website. So when you're talking with families about experiencing homelessness, you want to make sure that the families are comfortable and that you're not using the word homeless. Maybe you want to use a term like temporary housing, experiencing loss of housing. Avoid discussion at the front desk or registration area. Again, under McKinney-Vento, you have to follow FERPA, the FERPA law, and you have to meet those privacy settings in order to be in federal compliance. You also want to make sure that the family is there to meet with you in private. You want to explain the student is in temporary housing or eligible for certain services. They're eligible for transportation to the school of origin. They also qualify for free and reduced lunch, additional services that will support them academically and educationally. So let's look at homeless data. 3 homeless fields apply to all homeless students. They are required when you're classifying homeless students. The first one is H. It is used to classify homeless students. The second is J, and it is used to identify the direct certification of economically disadvantaged students. And the third is primary nighttime residency, coded 01 through 04. There are 2 other fields that only apply to homeless students served with McKinney-Vento subgrant funds and homeless unaccompanied youth. So let's break it down a little bit further. The homeless student classification H is the core homeless identifier for funding, assessment, accountability, and other reporting. The direct certification of economic disadvantage classification J is homeless students are part of the economically disadvantaged subgroup and are coded with a direct classification of economic disadvantaged student classification, again, J. In addition to the homeless H student classification, because their category eligibility for free school meals due to their homeless status. And last is the homeless nighttime residency coding is required for the federal reporting. So it's important to code all homeless students with one of the 4 homeless nighttime residency codes. 01 is shelters or transition housing. 02 is doubled up, living with other persons due to economic hardship. 03 is unsheltered in cars, parks, campgrounds, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, or 04 for hotels, motels due to lack of alternate adequate accommodations. So you want to mark yes if the homeless student is served by McKinney-Vento subgrant, or no, null, if you do not have the McKinney-Vento subgrant. You will find a list of the 22 LEAs that received the McKinney-Vento subgrant for FY23. Under ESSA, identifying homeless preschool children who are served with the McKinney-Vento subgrant are priorities for McKinney-Vento subgrantees and McKinney-Vento programming in general. So here are the LEAs who received the McKinney-Vento subgrant for FY23. I will not read through those. I will quickly let you look through that. Again, you're going to be coding students whether or not you're McKinney-Vento, if you receive McKinney-Vento subgrant, or if you just do regular McKinney-Vento homeless programming, you will still need to include that information in your data collection. Okay, so let's take a quick look at McKinney-Vento eligibility scenarios. So for an unaccompanied youth scenario, the student's living arrangement 1 meets the McKinney-Vento definition of homeless. So somewhere in there, they are meeting that definition, lacking fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And then number 2, the student is not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. Therefore, the unaccompanied homeless child or youth is McKinney-Vento eligible. So if they are unaccompanied homeless youth, then you would mark yes for the student. But if they are not, you're going to mark no or null if they're not unaccompanied homeless youth. So once a student has been identified as homeless, the status will apply for the entire school year. Again, I'm going to repeat that. Your homeless status will remain for the entire school year. The student is eligible for services for the remainder of the school year and will continue to be classified yes in the current and all future enrollments during the school year. Please be sure to use the appropriate primary nighttime residence code 01 through 04 for each enrollment. It is also important to note that you will use the code for the initial homeless identification if the student obtains permanent housing. Code the student with a direct certification of economic hardship J, student classification in each enrollment to ensure that student is included in the economically disadvantaged subgroup. You want to provide homeless students who transfer or find permanent housing the same services as other homeless students. For example, transportation of school of origin, free school meals, additional services, again, to meet those academic needs. When homeless students transfer during the school year, receiving LEAs use the enrollment begin date as the begin date for the homeless fields. The homeless student classification identifies students as homeless for accountability, funding, reporting, and other purposes. It is extremely important that you do not, again, that you do not remove the homeless student classification and other homeless fields at the end of the enrollment or school year. It is also extremely important that you do not roll over the homeless status classification or other homeless fields the next school year. Again, you want to make sure you do not roll that information over to the next school year. So let's look at homeless earlier this year. Because homeless status can be difficult to track for students who transfer during the school year, the homeless earlier this year flag is included in the homeless student list research query. The homeless earlier this year flag is Y for students who were identified as homeless in a previous enrollment during the school year. If the homeless earlier this year flag is Y, the homeless student classification should be Y. If the homeless earlier this year flag is Y and the homeless student classification is N, update the homeless student classification H. Primary nighttime residency 01 through 04 and direct cert J, student classification and SIS EIS. The team understands that it is not easy to track and work on different pages, but it is really worth the time to keep the data coded properly. Again, that affects your funding and other resources and supports that you'll need for your homeless programming. So let's look at this scenario. Suppose Tammy transfers into your LEA during the school year. Her enrollment information does not justify her as homeless. Should you assume that she is not homeless? I'll give you a minute to think about that. Well, not a full minute, just a second. So let's take a look at that. You would not assume that Tammy is not homeless. Homeless status is difficult to track for students who transfer during the school year. So you want to be sure that you run the student list research query in EIS. Next, you will check the homeless earlier this year flag. It is why, excuse me, if it is why Tammy was homeless in a previous enrollment during the school year. Remember, homeless status applies for the school year. So you would code and serve Tammy in the same manner as other homeless students. But if it is blank, Tammy was not homeless in a previous enrollment during the school year. Based on current and previous enrollment information from the school year, Tammy is not homeless. So let's look at homeless student list research query. To check your data in EIS, you're going to log in as an LEA or school user. First, you will select Data Reports Research Queries. Next, you'll select the Homeless Student List Research Query. Then select a school or all schools. And last, you're going to select the View Report. And as you can see, I provided a screenshot of the web page. So to check for homeless discrepancies, you will download the query results to a CSV or Excel format by selecting the fill icon to the right of the Find Next. You will use the filter function to identify discrepancies between the homeless primary nighttime residence code, fourth column from the right, and the homeless student classification, second from the right, and the homeless student classification, second from the right, and the homeless earlier this year flag, far right. The no discrepancies and discrepancy slides illustrate how to use the homeless student list research query to identify these discrepancies. So first, let me discuss no discrepancies. As you can see in the table below, there are no discrepancies. All homeless students have a primary nighttime residence code 01 through 04. All homeless students are classified as yes. The homeless earlier this year flag is yes. And the homeless student classification is Y in subsequently enrollments. So now let's take a look at a table that has several discrepancies. First, the homeless resident code is 02, but the homeless student classification is no. Second, the homeless student classification is yes, but the nighttime residency is blank or 00. Third, earlier this year flag is yes, but the homeless student classification is no in a subsequent enrollment. So let's look at how you can avoid homeless data discrepancies. For SIS screens, it is important to train your staff on the location of the homeless fields in your SIS. Often they appear on more than one screen. If you are not familiar with these screens, contact your vendor. For cross-validation, SIS packages are required to cross-validate the homeless student classification and the primary nighttime residence code. Be sure to contact your SIS vendor to determine how to implement your cross-validation procedures. So when you're uploading extracts to EIS to determine what extract is needed, extract 44 is the homeless student classification, and extract 41 is the homeless primary nighttime residency. Homeless served by McKinney-Vento and homeless unaccompanied youth. A standard sequencing applies when adding the homeless student classification and homeless residency code. Extract 41 must be loaded first. When Extract 41 loads values 01 through 04 for primary nighttime residents, EIS will accept a homeless student classification value of H, or Extract 44. It is important to note that if the homeless residency code is a null or 00 on Extract 41, EIS will not accept a homeless student classification value of H on Extract 44. If Extracts 41 and 44 are loaded at the same time, Extract 41 will process first, and then Extract 44 will process. However, when loaded in the opposite order when removing the homeless student classification and the homeless residency code, you will need to load Extract 44 first to remove the H submitted for the homeless student classification. Next, you will load Extract 41 to remove homeless residence codes 01 through 04, or change them to 00. Note, if Extracts 41 and 44 are loaded at the same time, Extract 41 will process first and generate a fatal error. So now let's talk about the homeless student research query. It's important that at least once per month you use the homeless student list research query to check your data. Be sure you download the data to an Excel or CSV file. You will identify homeless residency discrepancies by comparing the primary nighttime residents and homeless student classification columns. Then identify students who transfer into the LEA or school by comparing the homeless student classification and the homeless earlier this year columns. If research discrepancies are identified, you want to enter the correction in SIS and restage your data to EIS. Corrections populate EIS the day after the data is restaged. So let's look at year-end procedures. SIS packages should not, again, they should not roll over to your primary nighttime residents and other homeless fields. Again, do not roll those over for your homeless primary nighttime residents and other homeless fields. I can't stress that enough. You got to make sure you're not rolling that over. Be sure to contact your SIS vendor if you need assistance with the anti-rollover measures. So let's quickly look at resources. Again, you can find the McKinney-Vento homeless programming information by visiting ePlan, TDOE resources, ESSA information, guidance, PowerPoints, and webinars, Title IX, Part A, Education for Homeless Children and Youth. And then there's a McKinney-Vento toolkit and resource guide for FY23 that you can look at. I highly recommend that you do take a look at that. And then you can also look at the FPO data manual that will have very useful information about all the things I covered today in the webinar. And then you can visit the Education for Homeless Children and Youth non-regulatory guidance that will also help steer you in the right direction when it comes to identification and data collection. And then Schoolhouse Connection has a great resource for homeless data collection as well, and the National Center for Homeless Education, NCHE. So for questions about homeless programming, McKinney-Vento homeless programming, whether it be McKinney-Vento subgrant or homeless programming in general, you will contact myself, Vanessa Waters. I am the McKinney-Vento and Immigrant Grant Manager, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you have about programming. And then if you have questions about homeless data or coding, you can contact Trish Kelly, who is the FPO Data Manager. And then also, if you have EIS errors or restaging problems, you want to contact your district technology support team. They can provide support there for that. I hope this webinar on the homeless data has been very helpful. Again, please do not hesitate to reach out to me or Trish or your district technology support. We are always glad to help you and get you in the right direction. Again, thank you for joining me, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.